Hi, everyone, and Happy New Year. Today is Monday, January 4th, 2021. And I'm very excited that we're starting a new week, a new year, and hopefully a new way of being as we walk through this very strange and different and changed world. Today, our topic is eroticism, and I'm Dr. Alexandra Katehakis, Clinical Director at Center for Healthy Sex here in Los Angeles. So today I want to talk about a topic, again, eroticism, and this is actually yesterday's entry, which is a very sort of provocative and interesting topic to many, many people. But I was thinking about it over the weekend and thinking about how complex it actually is. I think when we think of the erotic, we think of something dark and lurid and sort of red in color and heat. But what it takes to really reach the erotic is a lot of work, I think, when it's working well and working beautifully. So, the quote today from Audre Lorde is: we tend to think of the erotic as an easy, tantalizing sexual arousal. I speak of the erotic as the deepest life force, the deepest life force. Think about that. A force which moves us toward living in a fundamental way. So there is an enlivenment in the body. There is a life force that's brought forward in the act of sex, because sex at its very basic and base, um, between a male and a female is designed for procreation. And of course, there are many, many iterations of love and sexual consort. But when we think about bringing life into the world, we can bring life into the world in terms of our own vitality, or we can bring life into the world literally through the act of procreation. So she's talking about this deep, deep life force, and you can contact this deep life force without necessarily impregnating somebody or getting pregnant. But I want us to think about life force as you think about, or as we go through this conversation. So I define erotic, and it's not just my definition, it's a dictionary definition, as the deliberate seeking of pleasure. And sometimes we deliberately seek pleasure, but we're not doing it very intentionally. And that's why I named my book Erotic Intelligence, because I was thinking about the deliberate seeking of pleasure with the skilled use of reason. And when we use reason skillfully, then we have a different sexual experience. So that synergy, that life force, is made manifest during lovemaking. And lovemaking starts with foreplay, right? It starts early, early on, and it builds to this crescendo. When people just throw themselves together with another person, they're just sort of banging bodies together. It's a very different experience. It's athletic, it's arousing. It can still have that vital life force to it, but it's lacking a profound kind of connection, what some might call a divine connection, which I can't really put words to because everybody's experience is uniquely their own. And so all I can do is point the way to how I see this, or what even my own experiences have been historically. So think about what's true for you and if you've had moments of these kind of connections. But this deep erotic connection, this life force connection, starts with you. It really, really starts with your own work. So if you have any self judgment about sex, if you have shame about sex and sexuality, it's highly unlikely that you're going to attain this aspiration. And this is an aspiration that the great tantric teachers have pointed us to from the beginning of time. And the Kama Sutra and other ancient traditions that talk about love as a connection to the divine. And they're pointing the way, but the way begins with us. The way begins with how much work you've actually done on yourself. Because when we're not congruent, when we're not integrated, when we have these various self states that are sort of broken down or broken apart or fragmented might be another word. It's very difficult to be, if not impossible really, to be in your body and to be fully present for the kind of sexual experience that I'm talking about here. And so it's important that you really look at your body image issues. How critical are you of your body? How self-conscious are you? Um, what are the judgments you have about your sexuality? If you are watching yourself in any way, shape, or form during sex, it's not likely that you will reach this pinnacle of eroticism because you're in your left brain. The critic is very present, and that doesn't allow for a full release into the body, into pleasure, into the ecstatic experience of what can feel for some like a hallucination or, as I said earlier, a contact with the divine. Those are really right brain, bodily based experiences, and they cannot be attained if there is a watcher. If the left brain is watching, looking, judging, criticizing, and all of that. So that's the first step is, what baggage are you carrying around and what do you need to integrate? So I wouldn't talk about it as an eradication. I wouldn't talk about it as getting rid of something. I would talk about it as reclaiming parts of yourself. When we're traumatized, we have these disparate self states and we recognize them, that sometimes we act fully functional and sometimes we're really immature and sometimes we can be super aggressive or angry or not know why we're doing the things we're doing. And that is a lack of integration internally. So that is the first foundational piece for the erotic, that you have to become centered. You have to become connected to yourself and not just to your heart and soul, but to your genitals also. And that brings us to your ability to really contact your own sexual arousal. Because if you trust yourself, then you can trust your own eroticism. That means you know what brings you pleasure, that you've experimented with masturbation, with touch, with movement, with things that are pleasurable to you that you can then communicate to a partner. And it's important to know those things without a partner present so that you can eventually communicate them to someone else. So that also requires a connection to oneself and a peace internally and a centeredness also. So when you challenge your limiting beliefs and your judgments about certain sexual acts, and you address your own inadequacies or perceived inadequacies, and the parts of you that you don't like, then you're on the road to being able to connect with another human being. And when you do connect with that person, it's important that you take time to get to know who they are. I mean, there are plenty of people that will tell you to slow down when it comes to sex and sexuality and to choosing a partner too. So often people land up in bed with someone and they're having this hot, crazy, athletic sex, but months go by and they realize they don't really know the person and they're not sure they even like the person. And more importantly, they may not trust the person. So choosing well is an essential part. And it doesn't mean that you can only have an erotic experience with somebody you've been, married to for 15 years. It means that whoever your lover is someone that you have selected, that you've paid close attention to. And going slowly is a great way to build an erotic charge and also to make sure that this is someone that you're aligned with. So, one of the things that we know about long term committed relationships and what keeps people together is that their values are aligned. We often want to think of the happily ever after story, that relationships um, do well when people are deeply in love. And love is certainly the glue that brings people together. It is the attachment process that has us staying together over time. But When that starts to wane, and if you're interested in that and understanding it more clearly, I would turn your attention to Helen Fisher's book called Why We Love. And there you will understand the neurochemistry of love. And so, with that alignment, you want a relationship that's interdependent, where both people are autonomous. And I write about this in Erotic Intelligence also, where we have these diametrically opposed needs to be attached and autonomous and simultaneously. And so, when we can be interdependent, when we know that we need our partner, but we can function without them, that is a healthy state. That's a secure state of functioning. And we know that we're in a relationship that is fair, that we take care of each other, that there is a sensitivity. Even if you're terribly angry at your partner, it doesn't mean that you stop, doing your part of the agreed chores in your household because you're angry at them. Like you stop going to work, or you stop doing laundry, or you stop going to the grocery store. You don't act immature. You can deal with your hurt and your upset and look at your part in what the hurt and upset is. But you don't abandon the relationship because you are hurt and because you're upset or angry. So there's a fairness in the relationship. There's what David Snarch called a collaborative alliance. That everything that we do for the good of the whole, we do for the relationship. And that takes a lot of work, and it takes some humility, and certainly a lack of selfishness, because I might want to do something that's really not good for the relationship. And so I have to ask myself, what is going to be the thing that most takes care of my relationship? And so there is a collaboration, there is a sensitivity, and the overarching agenda is what is good for both of us, for us, not just for me or for you. And when this sort of setup ensues, one of the other questions that I think is important to ask is, what is the purpose of this relationship? And I've talked about this many times before, but I think it's important to ask yourself, what is the purpose of this relationship? In our 20s, sometimes the purpose is to have fun and to have fun sex. And maybe in our 30s, the purpose is to build a family. That we've decided that we're going to have a child or two, depending on who we are and what our needs are. And so the purpose at that time is building a family, building a clan, if you will. And that can be true for people in their 40s as well. But maybe the purpose changes, in our 50s and 60s. And our purpose is for companionship, or because we want to grow old with someone, or we're out for adventure together. But we have defined a purpose so that our values are aligned and our purpose is aligned, so that we can get together or get behind this thing that we're doing with each other. And with that, you have safety and security. And when you have safety and security, you have great sex over time. But without that, there's always danger. There's always threat of divorce. There's always threat of somebody pulling the rug out from underneath somebody else. And that is going to just massively stoke insecurity. And oftentimes people are insecure um, to begin with. They're not securely attached. And as Stan Tapkin is so apt at describing and discussing, that we can earn a secure attachment in our relationship with each other. If we didn't have it in childhood, we can build that secure functioning in our love relationships. So these are the foundational items for eroticism. Eroticism doesn't just happen because you've got on great lingerie or you've been working out and you have a six pack. It happens between the head and the heart and the body. That it's a very complex proposition. It's not simplistic. It's not necessarily easy. But like anything, when you build a strong foundation, then you can really start to explore and have adventure and have fun. One of the things you'll find in both Erotic Intelligence and my workbook, Sexual Reflections, are questions about what your personal values are and what your values as a couple are. And then in sexual reflections, what your sexual values are. And do those sexual values align with your personal values? Because they should. Otherwise, you're likely out of your integrity. So it's useful for you to make a list of your values and for your partner to do the same, or to use the lists in various books that you find, um, and do some writing separately, and then come together and share those values with each other, along with your sexual values, or what turns you on sexually, what's sexually arousing to you. I call them values, but and start to look at these things and have conversations about them, because that's what will build an exciting erotic charge between the two of you. And then you know yourself, and you're not compromising or faking it or trying to accommodate the other person in some weird way. And your partner knows what really turns you on. And how exciting is that when you're not laying there miserable or wishing it would be over, or something along those lines? That your baseline is that you already know each other's bodies, you know each other's psyches, you know each other's hearts and minds. And so you're entering from a place that's more elevated, if you will, than you would be otherwise. So you kind of have a leg up on what your carnal desires are and what will emerge as a result of that. Because you can't know 100% what your eroticism is. It's not possible, because it's infinite and it's ever changing. But you have to have these foundational aspects that I'm talking about in order to explore that ever changing landscape. So when you discover yourselves and your erogenous zones together, then and only then, I think, are you able to fully give up control, to be in service of your lover, to be ruthless, as Jack Moran said, with your own personal pleasure, to be completely unbridled in the invitation of that self pleasure. So, again, without judgment or shame or criticism going on. And you can imagine when you're sitting at that place, then something emergent happens, something explodes within you, if you will. That's not just your personal orgasm, but something between the two of you that is different, that's amazing, that takes you into the land of a different universe, perhaps. And really, what's happening, I think, neurobiologically, is that we're building capacity for pleasure, just like we build capacity for love and touch. If you were deprived as a child, and you weren't touched much, or you recoil at touch, or you're more avoidant, therapy and group therapy and sometimes 12-step programs is what helps people to build capacity for intimacy. That's what I talk about a lot. And just as you build capacity for intimacy, you build capacity for pleasure. You know, sometimes something feels so pleasurable, you get to a point where you just can't take it anymore. It's just too much. It's sort of like being tickled. And that is a capacity building proposition for you, when you're at this place of optimal. So, again, before you can get to this, you have to have cleared out your trauma, done your own personal work. You cannot come to these higher levels of erotic expression and experience, unless you've really integrated those traumatic parts of yourself. Otherwise, you'll dissociate during the sexual act. And that's fine to an extent. But if that's the primary experience, you're likely hurting yourself and re traumatizing yourself. If you are knowingly in what they call in BDSM a subspace, where you are dissociating, and you're aware of this floating feeling, then that it may be a different matter for you. I don't know exactly. But to be so checked out that you're not able to make eye contact with your lover, you're not really activating and engaging all five senses, may mean that you are re traumatizing yourself in some ways. So you have to be the arbiter of this. You have to have this conversation with your a therapist, or certainly, someone that you trust deeply, before you can be discerning about what's right for you and what isn't, because people do have different sexual styles. One sexual style is to be in a trance state, just to close your eyes and be taken away into pleasure by your lover. And that's fine. I mean, I think we go in and out of these states as long as there is a point where your eyes are open and you are connected and you are reciprocating that pleasure for your partner. So that is a way of being involved with yourself. Other ways is to just be completely connected, where the two of you are in consort with each other in ways that you don't even know about, but the sounds that you make, the ways your body move together, the experience that you're having together is unique to the particular dyad of the two of you, and not something you would share with anyone else, because it's not possible. It's just not possible. So think about, where you're at right now. What is true for you, and see if you can get familiar with your own sexual erogenous zones. And keep in mind that these change over time also. Your body changes, so touch is going to change over time too. Areas that were previously not hypersensitive may become hypersensitive, or areas where you didn't feel something before, you're starting to feel more. So be current with your own body. It's the only beautiful, spectacular body that you have, where we experience so much of our feelings, because our feelings live in our body, our soul is in our body. We are one big sort of integrated body, mind, and soul. So don't separate those. And evoke the five senses when you're in a lovemaking practice. Light some incense or a candle. Drink delicious sparkling drinks, or taste yummy foods or chocolates. Don't be shy about playing around with the five senses. Use beautiful fabrics. Touch each other. You can maybe, use massage oils, lotions, things of that nature. And you don't have to, evoke all five at all times, because that might be overwhelming. But just choose one thing that you want to introduce sexually on any given night and see what that is. Maybe it's a massage oil where you take turns massaging each other. Maybe it's a sex toy, or it is beautiful lingerie or something along those lines. But pick a time to investigate your lover's scent, for example, or maybe you pick out scents together that you enjoy. So play in the arena of sex. That's how we learn, is through play. So don't forget, play is an important aspect of your eroticism. And if you're going to engage in really slower practices, some of the neo-tantric practices, I would suggest that you really, take some time to use sex as a practice. Your own personal meditation can be a practice where you're sitting quietly and you're grounding yourself in your body and paying attention to what's happening in your body, and noticing impulses in the body. Because arousal is not just genital arousal. Our heart beating is a form of arousal, palm sweating, a form of arousal, noticing the breeze on your skin if you're sitting outdoors meditating is a form of arousal. It's an arousal of the nervous system. You can meditate together as a start of your sexual experience also, whether you're sitting back to back with each other, or you're sitting in the position of yab yam, which is a classic tantric position where typically the female is sitting on top of the male's lap, cross-legged with her legs behind his, and his legs are crossed behind her. And so they're forehead to forehead. Her head is down and touching his forehead. And there's a breathing that takes place together. And that breathing is a circular breathing from, head to head, genital to genital, back up through the chest and making a circular motion. And that can build an erotic charge. Certainly, you'll feel that in the pelvic region. So, all of these things are meant for you to discover, whether it's through classes with someone like our own Don Cartwright here in Los Angeles, or through books that you read, or through various teachings that you subscribe to. But take the time to find out what your own sexual eroticism is. It's not about um, just reading one book and saying, oh, this book has the answer. That book may have one thing in it that really lights you up. You might learn one technique from a tantric teacher that you're like, oh my gosh, I wish I'd known that years ago. How exciting. So be a curious investigator of your sexuality, of what your erotic landscape looks like. Because just because you knew what it was at one point in your life does not mean you know what it is today. And it doesn't mean you know what it is with the lover that you have today, who also may have been your lover for the last 20 years, but you don't know them today the way that you knew them, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 20 years ago. So be discriminating, be curious and interested. It's like if you were a cook, you wouldn't use last month's ingredients to make a soup today. You would want fresh ingredients. And the soup you made last month is very different than the one that will come today because there are different vegetables in season, perhaps, or because it's winter and cold, you're in the mood for something spicy. Whereas in the fall, you were interested in something more savory and sage like. And in the summer, maybe it was more lemony. So it's still soup, but you're adding different dimensions to it as you go along. So we have a few questions here. I'll see if I can answer them. One says, my husband and I have had a very long and complicated sexual history. We've gone to therapy, retreats, etc., with mixed results. We have a great relationship outside of the bedroom, but in bed we seem unable to get off the frustrating sexual seesaw. When he desires me, I shut down, and when I desire him, he's turned off. What's going on? Well, that's a very complicated question that I don't think I can answer in this forum. Only you can answer that. Why do you shut down when he is aroused by you or when you desire him? When he desires you, you shut down. So that tells me that you're not actually open at all, that you're still afraid, that you have judgments about him, that you're not in a state of surrender, and only you can rectify that. That's not something that he can fix. It's certainly unfair to him. And likewise, when you desire him, he's turned off. I think there's deception going on here between the two of you, where you're not really being honest with each other about why you're turned off by each other and where you're scared and where you have walls up. So I would say it's back to the drawing board, but the two of you need to confront yourselves. And I'm not sure another workshop is going to do that for you. Someone writes, I was wondering if you can clarify when it's okay to do a past sexual act that was arousing into current sexual experience. I've been open and honest with my husband about the arousal template I developed due to the trauma that happened over and over again. He stated that he would never do anything to humiliate me, which made me feel safe and relieved because I would never want to experience that again. And I'm finally free of that. So I don't really understand the question here. It sounds like you're answering your own question, that if you have cleared up your trauma and your partner is not interested in humiliating you in a way that's traumatic for you, then I would say if something's arousing to you and you don't feel horrible afterwards or dissociated or bad about yourself, and it's enjoyable and arousing, then that would be your answer. That would be your green light. I was reading your newsletter about our sexual footprint, and I'm wondering, aside from therapy, how else we can begin to heal our negative sexual footprint, um, in order to get to an integrated state and higher level of eroticism, which I assume is spiritual sex. Well, I think it's very difficult to heal trauma without therapy. I don't know that anyone can actually do that by themselves. You really, really need a trusted therapist that can go into those places with you, that can be a fair witness to the pain that you experienced then that you're still holding on to now, that can actually regulate the experience for you. That's what creates integration. We cannot do this by ourselves. Try as we might, which is where I started this conversation, that we are highly interdependent creatures. And when we've been injured, we desperately need someone to walk through that process with us so that we can heal. So I don't know what your aversion to therapy is, but I honestly don't have an answer for you outside of that. Um, do I believe monogamy is necessary for intimacy or eroticism? No, I don't. But I do think that what I was talking about before about aligned values, I think relationships will break down whatever the nature of them are. If it's friends with benefits, or someone you have as a lover that you've had for years, without that trust, without the safety and security that's required um, in order to move into the sexual arena, I think there's a limit to where you can go, actually. And remember that safety is sort of fixed. Like if you're in this room right now, I'm in this office right now, and the door's locked, and I feel safe. I know that I'm safe here, barring an earthquake or something bizarre happening, but there's safety. But trust between two people is sort of a moment to moment negotiation. We have to earn trust every day in our relationships. We don't just de facto trust somebody. Now, that waxes and wanes, of course, and there are degrees of it. If you've been in a long term relationship with someone and you know them well and you know they would never hurt you, then there is trust. You don't have to negotiate the last 10 years of trust. But on any given day, you're kind of like, huh, I wonder what that person's doing, or where are they? We're constantly scanning for safety and trust. So those foundational pieces have to be in the relationship in order for people to give up control. And I suppose if we really look at the sub dom relationship in a pro dom situation, people that are ethical, I think, in their practices really trust one another to be in those arenas and to play in those spaces. That's part of what makes them so healing for some. So, yeah, just think about who the people are that you're engaged with, and you can answer that question yourself. And let's see, my husband and I have been together for 19 years. We've been sleeping separately for the last 4 or more years, mainly due to snoring, but also other relationship issues. How can we get back to intimacy? We've not had sex over a year. And then I find I get older, I'm lacking some libido also. Well, I think that's going to require conversations between the two of you about, do you want to be sexual? So I don't know what your actual relationship is like. You can sleep in separate bedrooms and still be affectionate and loving towards each other and meet for sex. So I can't tell what the actual relationship is like, but it starts with conversations about, again, what is the purpose of this relationship? What is the purpose of sex? Why do we want to be sexual? I mean, in my thinking, sex creates a positive emotional connection between two people. It's that life force that I was talking about when I started this conversation. And do you want to use your partner for that life force, or do you want to use someone else for that if the two of you agree that you're going to live together but not be sexual with each other? And I think, this question of libido as we age is certainly a curious one. I don't think it's libido or drive that has us wanting sex as we age. I think it's a desire to know oneself sexually and more deeply in these ways. of contacting yourself, your life force, your eroticism, the divine. That is the purpose of the sex itself, because sex, is a physical expression of the body. It's a muscle spasm. Essentially, that's what orgasm is. But it's also releasing a whole bunch of neural hormones that make us feel really good and alive. And so you say, well, as I'm aging, I lack libido. And that's a real chicken and egg situation. As you age, if you have sex, you'll feel more vital and alive than if you don't have sex. That will just sort of speed up the aging a little bit. So ask yourself about your own personal sexuality. What's it like right now? Do you have desire to touch yourself, to fantasize, to read erotica that might be fun for you, to enliven and activate your sexuality so that you're bringing something to your partner, as opposed to, "Oh, I'm feeling kind of dead inside and you're dead inside and here we are and gee, we can't get anything going here." You have to bring something to the experience. So bring your fullness and your sexuality and see what happens. What about people who've been married for decades and at least one still wants to have sex, but neither want to have sex with each other? Well, again, I think that's a conversation that you have to have with each other. Um, those conversations are intimate conversations, and intimacy should not be confused with sex. So, without these deeply intimate conversations, without getting really vulnerable and honest about your attraction to the other person, your own sexuality, saying, to your partner, as someone was just writing, that, I don't feel very sexual anymore. And I've been lazy about exploring my sexuality. So I'm going to go buy a vibrator or buy some lubricants or check out what's going on in the world of sexuality and see how I feel when I'm sexual with myself, for starters. And then I want to figure out how to be sexual with you. These are the kind of conversations you must have. And without that vulnerability, without that raw nakedness about what's actually true for you, you're going to be sort of dithering around the edges of this with your partner, and it will always fall flat in this place of being shut down, low libido, not really interested, and everybody's just sort of sitting there, not particularly happy about the relationship that they're in. And this, I think, is why people end up having affairs or, looking for other people to have sex with. In some ways, I think that, affairs and cheating is just the lazy way out. It's the easy way out, unless, of course, you get caught, and then that's a nightmare. But it's just sort of, it's lazy. So see if you can challenge yourself to speak the unspeakable, to talk about what's super difficult, and to be able to hear it. And these are hard things to hear from your partner also. You've got to be able to tolerate your discomfort, to kind of lick your own wounds as you're hearing your partner tell you that they're not particularly attracted to you. And this is why. And then you've got to decide whether that's something you want to do something about, if you even can do something about it, if that's their issue or yours. These are complicated conversations that are really required to make it over these bridges, or these sort of gaps, let's call them that. They're bridges that have to be built to get over these gaps that are a natural part of long-term relationships. Can someone lose attraction over time with their partner? Can attraction be created? Yes and yes. And I think I just addressed that somewhere in these last two questions. The most free sexually I've felt, those erotic states that you talk about, happen with people I know, but I'm not in deep long-term relationships with. When real love and partnerships enter into it, I start to feel some repulsion and just not horny from them over time. I start to feel like I'm losing the power of eroticism. And so it makes the need to break up or stay to feel that personal charge again. Okay, so that's a really great question. And I think this is what happens with familiarity over time. So the challenge is to look deeply into your partner's eyes, to see that person as an erotic being, because they were once when you fell for them, when you thought they were hot or exciting. The problem is a lack of novelty, which is what you're talking about. And we need novelty for the dopamine system to be excited. It's always about something new and something fresh. And so, if you can see your partner's body as something that is beautiful or sexy because you want to see it that way, if you've been in a long term relationship, the body that you met at, 20, 25, 30, 40 years ago is not the body of today, but you've been through a lifetime with that body. So that's a body that you should cherish and revere. And also a body that you've marked time with, especially if it's a body that has birthed children. And your body is not in any better condition than that one is, most likely either. So it's not just one sided. So, can you look beyond the superficial? Can you look into the depth of that human being and make contact with that part of them that is still alive and still erotic and still wants to be made contact with? And likewise for yourself. So, this requires a certain kind of metal, when you can look past those parts of your partner that you think are a turnoff, and that you forge ahead into your lover with a thirst and a desire in the same way that you want to be wanted. So it's a desire to want and to be wanted that's part of what ignites this eroticism, I think. Um, So I think that was the last question that I see here. And I hope that you all think about these questions and think about your partner, especially when we become householders and we're running our lives. And if you have children and you're having to manage that, and right now everything can seem so dreary and familiar. It's like, I said to my husband, if somebody told me that I was going to be trapped alone in a house with you for a year, 20 years ago, I wonder if I would have thought, okay, well, probably at that time I would have said, that's fantastic, of course, because, I was crazy in love at that time. But I have moments of crazy in love, and that's what we're looking for in long term relationships. When we have moments of eroticism, moments of seeing our partner as beautiful, sexy, vibrant people. And of course, if you don't feel that way about yourself, then there's no way other people are going to feel that way about you. And someone just asked, what if you lack experience? This person's in their early 20s. Well, if you lack experience, how lucky are you? Because you've got the whole world of sex and sexuality ahead of you. And that means you start simply. You start by touching your own body, by finding out how to bring yourself to orgasm, by learning about what kind of touch you like, or paying attention to people that sort of arouse you or light you up or make you feel excited when you see them. And also, learn about what's sensual for you. And I think we're all having to learn these things ourselves over and over and over again, because we're constantly changing and we're constantly becoming new people that we're learning about. As the poet David White says, we are constantly meeting the person we're becoming. And that is an exciting proposition. So don't dump your sexuality, your eroticism on your partner. It's not their job to jumpstart your body. It's your job to be vital, to work out, to feel good about yourself, to take care of yourself, to be sexy because it's what is vitally alive for you. And then you bring that to your sexuality. So someone's asking that, let's see, can you quickly reiterate that eroticism doesn't solely involve intercourse penetration? Yes. So certainly eroticism can come from eating a juicy piece of fruit. or a piece of chocolate cake. We've all had the experience where we put something into our mouth and it just explodes, and all we can do is make noises of pleasure about how, oh my God, this is so good, or it's amazing, or we even say this is orgasmic if it's like a chocolate souffle or something. That has nothing to do with sexual intercourse. That has to do with an aliveness and a receptivity to pleasure. And so we can experience eroticism in many, many different arenas. But it starts with us activating these pleasure centers in ourselves. So next time you make yourself a simple cup of coffee or a simple cup of tea, I want you to do it in a way that evokes your own personal eroticism. What do you love about the smell of that coffee? Like, I think coffee is just amazing in the way it smells, but I'm not a coffee drinker. I don't really like the way it tastes. But I could go into a Starbucks and just smell the aroma and be so excited about that. And so activate your five senses. Find out what turns you on, not just what gives you an erection or has you lubricating, but what turns your full body on. That is an erotic moment, because that is one little layer that you're going to keep layering and layering and layering upon until you are in the sexual arena. So I'm going to leave you with that task today to see if you can find eroticism in ordinary moments during the day today, and to think about pleasure, because we've had so much pain this past year. And I think we're headed towards a new dawning, a new beginning, and we still have a ways to go. So don't give up. Don't give up on your sex life. Don't give up on your sexuality. Don't give up on your vitality and your life force. We all are in this boat together, and we've got to row it together. So the more alive all of us are, the more we can hold a vision for optimism for this new year. So happy new year, happy 2021. I hope you have a juicy, erotic day today, and I look forward to talking to you in February.